What's up, everybody? Here in just a few minutes, I'm going to turn this over to the interview I did with Max Browne. But I just want to go through a little bit and give you guys almost a table of contents, if you will, for how the interview takes place. Begin with, Max Browne's going to give you the credentials. He's going to credentialize himself. He's going to talk about his experience as being the number one recruit in the country back in 2013, I believe. He's going to talk about all of that. Number two, we're going to talk a little bit about his college career and kind of it coming to a conclusion and an end. We're going to talk a little bit about the quarterbacks and coaches he's had association with. He's going to tell you a story about being recruited by Nick Saban. All that stuff's going to be in there. From there, we're going to talk about his rehab, suffering a shoulder injury his graduate season out at Pittsburgh. So that's going to be in there, guys. And then after that, we're going to lead into a discussion about Carson Wentz, his mental state, and the footwork issues that we saw. So without further ado, guys, I'm not going to hold you up any longer. Here's the interview. What's going on, everybody? My name is Steven Hyder. This is Gate City Sports Channel. And today, I have a special guest for you guys, someone that I'm really excited to bring to you. This is someone whose content I greatly respect. And, I'm really excited just to get him talking today, guys. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys to Max Browne and just let him give you guys a Cliff Note sample size of who he is, what he does, and where you can find him on YouTube and social media.
Love it. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, Steve. Pumped to chat with you guys. But yeah, like Steve said, my name is Max Browne. It might be a few of you guys that have seen. I did a recent breakdown on Jalen Hurts, which is how Steve and I cross paths. I do a lot of like X's and O's, film breakdown. A lot of people talk about it as if like it's the Dan Orlovsky breakdown videos. I took a page out of his book, and I've been doing it for a few years, not as consistently as I'd like, but been consistent for the past few months at least. And so doing breakdowns of college and NFL, but a little bit more about who I am. Back in the day, way back in the high school ranks, I was the number one quarterback in the country coming out of high school. So I was Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield's class, Josh Allen's class, those guys. I'm 26 years old, and I went to USC. Like I said, was a big recruit. Did some things there a little bit. Was a captain on the Rose Bowl team. Ultimately, ended up getting benched for Sam Darnold, who's another name that we know, and transferred and made my way out to Pittsburgh and played in my final year at Pitt before I ripped up my right shoulder. And I gave pro ball a run in 2018, but things didn't necessarily work out. And in that 2018 fall season, that's when I started to dabble into the broadcasting side of things. So started more so on the West Coast with Pac-12 football, which isn't necessarily, I envision that the cup of tea of this audience necessarily, but that's where I got my start. It's been doing some work with other networks. I work for Stadium. I do stuff directly for USC Athletics and SiriusXM as well. And the biggest thing with me is also just the content I produce on my own social channels, so Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And that's kind of where I'm at. Still trying to find my way, but got the film breakdown as certainly a pillar in my life right now.
So, just so everyone knows, when he says that he was a major recruit, guys, he was a major recruit. I mean, just doing basic Google search on Max. I mean, he had offers from Oklahoma. He had offers from Washington, not Washington State, and Alabama. And you chose USC. Can you give us, like, some of us who never really faced that level of recruiting, like, what is that like? I mean, how do you make those decisions? Are you paying attention to the coaching staff, the systems? Like, what makes you choose, like, one major program over another?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it's kind of funny, too, because, I mean, a lot of people probably view me as I'm young, I'm 26, and I know I am, but I say that because the recruiting landscape from when I was in it in 2013 to where it's at now in 2020 is drastically different. Twitter was like just becoming a thing, but I didn't really talk to coaches on Twitter. Instagram certainly was not a thing when I was getting recruited, and that's kind of we're seeing programs all over the country invest heavily in their recruiting department. So even that one aspect's different, but it was sweet. I mean, that's one thing that my college career didn't necessarily go according to plan, but I mean, I always say I had a fairy tale kind of high school career. I mean, I won a bunch of state titles, Gatorade National Player of the Year, had all the offers I wanted. I remember talking and getting offered by Nick Saban outside my high school art class, like little stuff like that. It's just ridiculous. I remember Josh Heupel, who's been in the news lately to get the Tennessee job. He went to my basketball game against my crosstown rival, and I threw down a dunk, and it was right in front of him. Like little like sweet, just kind of fairy tale recruiting moments that are cool to look back on. It was awesome, and landed at SC. At the time, they were the number one team in the country, which is kind of crazy looking back on that. But that's Matt Barkley, Robert Woods, Marquise Lee, those guys. They were the number one team in the country. I'm a West Coast guy, so I grew up in the Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart. Like that's the pinnacle of football. I knew I wanted to play at a big-time school, and some other factors. I like the idea of living in LA. I like the school and the degree that was there. And then SC – an opportunity to play early. So I competed to replace Matt Barkley that first year after. I got beat out by Cody Kessler, another NFL guy. But just a lot of factors that were pointing me that direction. And I knew I wanted to play at a big-time program, and landed with the Trojans.
It's pretty cool. That's definitely a major program, and I could definitely understand the appeal to wanting to be in LA. I mean, USC, I mean, it makes a lot – I get it. I mean, it does. But I would definitely have some reservation. You know, it's like, man, Alabama. But then, I mean, do you guys factor in things like, but man, if I go to Alabama, like, man, next year, the following year after that, they're going to keep bringing in these number one overall recruits. So does that even factor?
Yeah, it's funny too, because I'm like, when I was a recruit, Alabama, they were struggling at the quarterback position. They were bringing in transfers. Like it felt like they had, remember, like every other position was addressed. It was just, if we can just find a quarterback, like that was when they were winning games 17-10 or whatever. Like maybe that's a little bit of exaggeration, but they were looking for a quarterback. So when I was getting recruited, it was, hey, come in here and you can finally be that dude. I guess they had AJ McCarron about 5 years before me, but there was a rough stretch there, a little bit of quarterback play. But you definitely factor in those things. I think I was different than a lot of recruits in that I was genuinely willing to go wherever. And most guys kind of gravitate to their hometown school or their schools in the country, and that's the case for 80% of guys. I was a guy that, hey, I was willing to – I stayed on the West Coast, but it's still a 3-hour flight away. It's not like my family's seeing me every weekend kind of thing, and that's where I was different. But you certainly think about everything. I know for me, I always thought about, like, coaches moving and whatnot. Like Doug Nussmeier was the offensive coordinator that offered me Alabama, and he's been at 4, 5, 6 stops since then. So – that's one thing that's definitely in front of mind during that process.
So I was kind of looking up some of the coaches that you've worked with. I mean, Lane Kiffin, Steve.
It's a long list.
Yeah, Clay Helton, Pat Narduzzi. Did you have a favorite out of those guys?
Oh, I mean, probably Coach Orgeron. I do have to admit, though, like I only had him for 2 months as my head coach, but he was the guy that first recruited me to SC. I mean, every football fan knows his energy and loves that, so I'll go with Coach O.
It's a good one. For Eagle fans here, guys, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, if you will. I mean, he's alluded to some of this. Yep. He's alluded to some of this, man. Cody Kessler, Sam Darnold, Ben DiNucci. I mean, you even played a little bit with Kenny Pickett. I think it was his freshman year, right? When you were finishing out your graduate season there, right? I think so.
That's what's crazy about this whole thing is Pitt had a huge void. So they had Nate Peterman, another guy there. He left, and they had a huge void at the quarterback spot. They had one scholarship guy on campus, was Ben DiNucci. And the reality is, at that point, they did not think highly of him. I mean, I have no problem saying that. And so, like, we need to get a guy in here and a grad transfer. Yeah. And at that same spring, they were also bringing in Kenny Pickett. It's funny because both those guys, Ben DiNucci obviously started for the Cowboys last year, and Kenny Pickett's going to get a great shot at the NFL whenever he leaves Pitt. But it's just funny looking back because that quarterback room, when I walked in, I was like, oh, they have no one here. But then that spring of 2017 when I entered, I mean, I guess I was the worst guy in that room, I guess. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but it's just funny the loaded rooms that, I definitely was a part of.
Was there any of those guys where you just, you were sitting, watching them, you're warming up together and you're just like, this dude's going to be a star? Were any of them, like, did you know right away?
Yeah, I knew when Sam Darnold entered campus, you could tell, I mean, the learning curve that a lot of young quarterbacks have with just the speed of the game. And it's not like they're bad players. You can just tell their brain's going a mile an hour. I mean, there's a reason most true freshman quarterbacks redshirt because you need that time to just adjust. And Sam didn't have those learning curves that I had seen from other freshman quarterbacks, including myself. I remember right away they were talking like they call them – actually, it's funny. thinking about this because no one calls him this now, but they're kind of like, oh, mini Brett Favre, because he was just kind of like at the time, he was pretty raw. He was like a high school basketball player, played linebacker a little bit in college. So he was still growing into the position. But Sam was certainly one guy that he just didn't have that learning curve. And even a guy like Kenny Pickett, right away, he graduated high school early. Sam did not. But so as Kenny's like senior year of high school, when he came in for spring ball, and he's got a strong arm and he's making some things. And once again, like that learning curve wasn't there for him. It's no secret that he's been a 4-year, about to be 5-year starter for Pitt because he's a good player as well. He's not top 5, I don't think, like Sam was, but he's a great quarterback.
Sure. So to be honest, I was looking, like I said, I knew who you were coming in. I was like, man, like everyone kept saying, you got to check out Max Browne. Steve, you got to check out Max Browne. I was like, man, that name, it's like ridiculously familiar. And I figured out like, oh, he played that season at Pitt. I know exactly who he is. Just so people understand this. When I say you had a good game against Rice, I just want to paint a picture for people of what the kind of production you were coming off of in that game. Guys, when I say you had a good game, you threw for 4 touchdowns, 87.5% completion rate in that game, and over 400 yards. You come into Syracuse.
We got it done.
Yeah, it's impressive. You go into Syracuse. And things they're not going perfectly, but I know some people don't really understand, but when you're playing college ball, like, the talent level from one week to the week and who you're playing and it can be so drastically different. But by all accounts, if you really look into the game, it's not like you were really struggling in that game, but you had this disappointment to where you injure your shoulder and it knocks you out. Your graduate transfer, you get knocked out and then they tell you your season's over. What is the recovery like? Like when you're, because now you're facing the fact like, okay, like if I'm going to have a professional career, it's going to have to really be the long haul, the long game here. Like how do you start the recovery process? Is that really done in house with like Pittsburgh or do you seek your own medical staff and your own facilities and personal training? How does that even start?
Yeah. And obviously there's kind of 2 pillars to that. There's the physical recovery, but there's also kind of the mental recovery as well. We talked about how big of a recruit I was. So to kind of have that be the end of my college career, it was a tough pill to swallow, and I'm happy to get into that. But your direct question about kind of the physical rehab, it's actually funny you referenced that because weirdly enough, my rehab I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. Pittsburgh covers the rehab, so I rehab with their physical therapy department, and I was still on campus for a good 3 months before I kind of left to pursue the NFL. So they cover the expenses because my shoulder injury happened on their dock. Like they're on the bill for my rehab recovery. So I ended up going to a training facility in San Diego to train for the NFL, and they paid for that rehab, just the shoulder rehab. They didn't pay for the whole trainers and me trying to get like a quarterback coach and all that, but they paid for just the shoulder aspect. And I rehabbed my shoulder for 15 months before I had to work out with the Redskins and the Steelers. And so that 15 months, I ended up moving back home to Seattle. I'm from the Seattle area, and my sister-in-law is a physical therapist, so I worked at her deal, and it's a whole grind. But in terms of how it happens and who pays for it, it was on Pittsburgh's bill. But I think the hardest part, or even harder than the actual rehab, because I've been used to the work, was kind of the mental aspect too. As I'm sure your listeners are kind of piecing the dots together, if I was better or more highly regarded than a Jared Goff or a Baker Mayfield and all that, and then I have this college career where the reality is most of your viewers probably don't really know who I am necessarily, like that's a huge fall or a huge drop in terms of expectations and kind of where I thought my life was going to be. And so that was tough to deal with. And that's something that, you kind of grow through. And it's funny because you fell on my film breakdowns, but I also do a lot of content on kind of that transition out of athletics, more so on my Instagram and a little bit on Twitter. But that's both those pillars are kind of aspects to my life. But to circle it back, I was rehabbing for kind of 15 months, was in San Diego, went back to Pittsburgh for a month, moved back home from Seattle. And then that was kind of the grind.
Yeah, I can imagine that's really tough. Especially when you're talking about the mental aspects of the game, which kind of is a nice little natural leadway into one of the complications that Philadelphia is facing right now with the quarterback situation and Carson Wentz. And I mean, how much of this do you believe is mental with Wentz more than anything?
Very much. I mean, I don't know how to put a percentage on it, but it matters. One thing, and we were kind of talking about this off air a little bit, of just kind of the dynamics in a quarterback room. Like, I don't care what people say. When you draft a quarterback, even in the second round, like Hurts was, or third round, you have to correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, those a top early round pick. Like, I don't care how confident you are. Like, that has an edge to you. That pisses you off. We saw it with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay a little bit. We saw it in subtle ways with Tom Brady in New England. I know they didn't draft a top guy, but when you kind of get the sense that your program doesn't believe in you wholeheartedly, like, that wears on guys. And with Carson Wentz, I mean, not to relate his thing to where I'm at, because it's different, but he has the injury, right? He's on this climb, and he's on this incredible trajectory of going to be a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the league, that has that injury. Things start crashing, or like he keeps it all together, but in his mind, you could kind of piece things together a little bit of things might be going array a little bit. And if the pieces around him aren't necessarily in place like they once were, then one bad thing leads to 2, leads to 4, kind of leads to 8. And before you know it, you're kind of a different quarterback and a different guy. So, I mean, I certainly think it's mental. And I also think, talking in a wider than an Eagles scope, if he goes elsewhere, the ability to kind of hit the reset button and the restart button, there's something to be said about that being super healthy for a quarterback's mental state. I know I noticed that going from SC to Pitt, of just kind of taking a deep breath and hitting reset. It would not surprise me if Carson Wentz, 1, leaves, and then 2, finds success elsewhere, just because he's able to kind of get a fresh start.
Yeah. On the topic of Carson Wentz, I mean, this has been a recurring thing with me, where I think a lot of people may have discovered me when I went on my rants about Press Taylor, because I was not happy with the job Press Taylor was doing as the quarterback coach. And it's like, look, I've never coached at the professional level or even at the college level, but I've definitely coached football, and I've definitely coached quarterbacks, and I can spot when something ain't right here. Like, very basic footwork issues are rearing their head here. When you look at some of the issues that Carson Wentz has had, right, where he's just not, to me, I could see sometimes on film where it almost feels like to me that he's coming out and he's twerking that body, and you're supposed to really get your eyes before you get your feet, but it's like he's not doing it, which leads to him being pigeon-toed. He's missing targets. You look at him overstriding. I know people may not get the complexity of what I'm about to say. I know you'll understand it, but it almost feels like when he's coming out of that, like he's coming into that slide, it's then causing him, because he's not going through the proper, footwork procedures here. When he's doing that slide and he's coming into the pocket, then he starts doing that telltale thing that certain quarterbacks do. And I know you can probably relate, being like, you're like 6'5", right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, for me, I could never overstride. I'm just not tall enough. But you start getting that overstride now, because now you're you know what I mean? You start really moving those feet back when you're sliding into the pocket to step into it. Like, it just seems like there was so much going on from a fundamental standpoint with him, where it was just like, this is embarrassing. Like, this should not happen. Like, especially with a guy that's this talented. Like, don't get me wrong. You get guys like, what's going on in Buffalo. Like, we saw that as well. I mean, same exact kind of situation there with Allen, where he had very similar issues with his footwork to Carson, but being a guy that has that, that kind of frame that's very similar to a Carson Wentz, like, what is done in the offseason that kind of like helps keep your footwork in motion as a quarterback? Like, what are the things that are done to kind of keep you from having these kind of like, kind of problems from rearing their ugly head and then becoming like almost pandemic level? Sorry for the words, given the fact we're in a pandemic, but you know what I'm saying? Like, where it just becomes like this thing that just completely erodes every part of your game.
No, totally. And your point about the comparable frames between us, I definitely was a guy that was an overstrider at times. And the way you fix that is you work at it. And I mean, I wish I had like a more kind of elaborate answer, but it's understanding that, hey, this is an issue I have. I was a long leg quarterback. And when you overstride, 1, it makes you inaccurate, but 2, it makes you kind of susceptible to injury if you are extending your front leg out. And obviously we know kind of lower extremity injuries with Wentz a little bit. And it also doesn't allow you to be compact and allow you to have a quicker release, because when you extend your lower body and your legs, that naturally kind of, you'll hear a saying like your hands tied with your feet, or your arms are tied with your feet. And when things get long down low, you better believe they're going to get long up top. And so I think it's working on it. But I also think to me at the NFL level, like a lot of these guys, and I have a breakdown coming out of Trey Lance next week, the North Dakota State quarterback, and he has a longer motion, so it's kind of a similar thought process. But when you get to the NFL, like guys kind of are who they are, and I know that relationship between a NFL quarterback coach and a star QB, like it's almost like a consultant relationship. It's almost like I know what I need to do. I just need another brain in the room to kind of help me. It's not like I say that because it's not like the dynamic in college where it is a true mentor-mentee kind of thing, where it is a true hierarchy in the room. And so I don't know the exact relationship there, but I think when you have offensive line struggles and you aren't confident maybe in your game, in the concepts, in the teammates around you, or in the offensive line, that's where the footwork can go awry. Because it's one thing, and I say this a lot about Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a hell of a quarterback, but he had a lot of pieces fall in place and fall in his favor that his peers, a la Sam Darnold, did not have fall in place. And I think that helps some of those one-off little issues that can become big issues. I think he definitely was very fortunate in that regard. And I say that because a guy like Carson Wentz may not have had that this past year with some of the offensive line stuff or playmaking stuff or whatever you want to say. And so that's a roundabout answer, but it's if you know that's the issue and you know you're a tall quarterback, you gotta rep that and be wary of that, especially when things break down, and train that. When you're training in the offseason, train being off balance, train not having a clean pocket. Put yourself in those scenarios so when the live bullets start flying, you're not falling back on bad overshooting habits.
And that's a very good point, because I think a lot of times what gets confused is the role of an independent quarterback coach that you hire in the offseason, like an Adam Dedeaux, who has worked with Carson Wentz prior on that overstride issue, and the role of the quarterback coach, which to me, I always kind of, and it may just be wrong, I may not completely understand the dynamics of how the role and the position works with a quarterback coach, but I always thought that they really more so worked with like going over the film and asking like, okay, like, hey, your progressions were supposed to be here. Like, what took you so long to get off of this read? Like, I always thought that was more the role that the quarterback coach played, more so than trying to fix your footwork. Cause the saying that I always heard. Now, me personally, I've definitely worked with athletes in season, but we're talking about high school, not pros, on fixing footwork issues, mechanical issues with their pocket mechanics. But I've always heard that you can't do it in season. It's almost impossible to do in season. And it's
pretty much any level. I think you're spot on with that assessment of kind of how the quarterback room works. And I think the job of any quarterback coach at any level is to get your quarterback in a position where he is confident, whatever that means. So oftentimes that means if his footwork's shit and he doesn't have, that's not good. It's fixing that so then he can be more confident in his game. But at the NFL level, when you kind of are who you are mechanically and whatnot, it's, hey, we got a game next week. Hey, we got a game in 3 months. What can I say? What can I do to get Carson Wentz the most confident? And I feel like at the NFL level, most of the time that is instilling confidence in your quarterback, not necessarily overcorrecting him. Don't get me wrong, you still got to coach, but it's just that fine line. And I've been around the Seahawks just a little bit, kind of had a little workout, and you can kind of get the gist of what, I guess it was Schottenheimer before, but he's no longer there. But Schottenheimer, like Russell Wilson, obviously Russell Wilson is top 5 quarterback, but Carson Wentz, it wasn't that long ago that we were kind of talking about him as potentially in that realm, but it was definitely like Schottenheimer was there to be a consultant for Russell Wilson. Like, how can I help you rather than a true direction? It's kind of funny you mentioned Adam Dedeaux too, little side note, in terms of 6 degrees of separation. They would always train at USC. So we would always look out and like Tom House is another quarterback name you'll hear out there. He trains at SC, and literally USC's baseball field is Dedeaux baseball field. So that's where we would train Adam Dedeaux. So just kind of another funny small world moment I felt like referencing.
This might be a little complex, guys. I'll try to give a brushing of what this means. And if Max wants to add more context to it, one of the other things I've noticed with Carson is when I really watch film of him is that I would see this issue of when he should be no hitch. Guys, when we say no hitch, best way I can explain it is when you're throwing a vertical route, kind of when you hitch, it's like a bounce step that you go forward with it when you're kind of getting ready to release the ball. You should be no hitch on shorter routes, especially when you're trying to run something that's more timing and rhythm based. I would see where, and I completely understand this, because there's a guy who was shorter who had to play the position. I bounced. I was really bad for bouncing, like to the point where I would be getting yelled at by like 50 people, like people in the stands yelling at me, coaches yelling at me, you know, like fellow teammates are yelling at me, like, what are you doing? Stop bouncing. But I would see these issues, and like it's really tough, because when you break down film, you're only really looking at a certain perspective that you have understanding of. You don't know exactly where the depth of the player should be. And that's one thing, like when I talk to people, when you're looking at like screen passes and stuff like that, is that it's easy to say like, man, why is that should be a no hitch? Like, what are you doing? But then it's like, well, but did that affect the throw, or was the running back not in the right place? Was he expecting him to be here and he's not quite to the depth he's supposed to be at? It's things like that, man. But I definitely thought I saw that on his film. I don't know how much, like film work you've got to see, or if it's just mostly just the game angles you get when you're watching TV of him. But I've definitely, like, his footwork to me has been shocking. And I've said it before, we do a thing called Battlebirds podcast every Saturday night. And I've said before, it's the greatest regression that I've witnessed from a quarterback play at that level. Like, I've never seen play like it.
I'm trying to think who would even compare to that. But yeah, I guess I'll have to put that. I don't disagree with you at first thought, but I'll have to come up with someone else. But yeah, your point about the hitching, it's hard to explain what exactly that is without having a video component. But I feel like you did it justice there. But that's a huge component of quarterback play, because we always hear the word timing. Well, timing and hitching or no hitching, they go hand in hand. Timing routes, you do not hitch. You don't gather. You don't. Gather yourself, or hitch up, or bounce up, whatever term you want to use. Another term you'll hear in the quarterback world is closing. You don't want to close up. And if you're late or the timing's not right, it often lends its hand that you might be hitching, or you might be a little bit delayed in the pocket. And it also, if I put my quarterback helmet on, if you're hitching when you should not be, that also screams indecision to me. And that screams that you're not confident in something, whether that is the receiver you're throwing to, whether that's the concept you're executing, whether that's what you're seeing with your eyes and the defensive structure. So it could be one of many different things. Yep. But I know that's a huge thing with younger quarterbacks, right? Especially in college, maybe not as much as in the NFL, because you kind of grow out of that. But in college, it's don't hitch, Max. Get the ball to your hands, because you're so used to hitching, bouncing, gathering in high school, because you can get away with it, right? I mean, you're just better than everyone in high school, but doesn't necessarily happen at the next level. And no, I think the point by you is totally fair. I've watched way more Jalen Hurts film than Carson Wentz in terms of true breakdown, but from what I'm hearing, that makes sense.
All right, ladies and gents, that was part one of my interview with Max Browne. Like I said, guys, I'm going to divide this up into 2 to 3 parts for you guys. So part 2 will be tomorrow. Stick around for that, guys. You're going to want to see it, because we're going to talk about install of the offense. And we're going to talk about the influence a quarterback may or may not have over the install of the offense. And then we're also going to talk about adjustments that are made at the line of scrimmage. We're going to talk about killing plays. All that stuff is coming up tomorrow in part 2. If you have not had the opportunity yet, please check the description down below. I put all of Max Browne's information in there. A must-see video. Go check out his breakdown of Jalen Hurts, guys. It is a must-see video. He did an incredible job breaking that down. And as always, guys, I really do appreciate y'all tuning in. It is very grateful, guys. Appreciate y'all so much. Leave your comments down below. Don't forget to tell Max that Steve at Gate City sent you. And without further ado, guys, peace. I'll see y'all tomorrow.